Hey everybody, welcome back to Around the Emirates podcast with Sara Mousa, where I speak to guests from across UAE about topics you want to hear about. Today, I am joined by the lovely Lama Yammine Hocks, who is co-founder of FinTech-SaaS OPTO. Welcome to the show, Lama.
Thanks for having me, Sara.
It's an absolute pleasure. I love the fact that I have a female entrepreneur who is also breaking into the fintech space. So please tell me your story and why you decided to co-found this company.
Sure. So I'll go back to quite a few years ago. So I was born in Lebanon, as you would have guessed by now, and I left Lebanon after the 2006 war. I got a scholarship to Spain. I started studying. I finished my bachelor's in economics and finance in Spain, and then I got my first job in China in the banking space, right? Super random, right? And then I started essentially a career in banking that took me from China, a bit of South Korea along the way, a little bit of Kenya, right? A stopover in Kenya, and then the UAE, where I covered the region for quite a while with Standard Chartered in this case. And then at some point during my career, I had taken a small sabbatical in Kenya to launch an impactful startup in the solar energy space. And then I came back to the UAE. I was covering essentially corporate. So I was doing corporate banking. And for a while, I started focusing on small and medium enterprises, right? And this is where I started seeing a lot of inefficiencies that were happening, right? We have a lot of SMEs. SMEs are the backbone of almost every economy, yet large banks were not building products that catered to the small guys that were the backbone of the economy. So I started looking at the inefficiencies that were happening across the board. And at some point during my career, I essentially quit my job. I quit my job. I moved to Berlin. I had always been fascinated by Berlin. And obviously, it happened to be not only a beautiful space to live in, but a startup hub. And so I moved there and I started exploring the idea of building something for these smaller companies. That was 2020. So that was, I quit and moved during COVID. So fast forward a few months, I had started doing my executive MBA at Northwestern in Chicago. And I had met who would end up being my co-founder and CTO. And so together we started ideating about the problem statement that we had seen across small and medium enterprises. So I'll walk you through that, just to explain a little bit how OPTO came to be and what kind of problems we started solving in the beginning. So we looked at Europe in particular, right? And we found out that in Europe, there's a specific segment of SMEs that was generating a lot of revenue that was so essential to our livelihood and was absolutely forgotten. And those were trucking companies, logistics companies, right? So in every major economy, and I'll just focus on Europe right now, you have what we call freight forwarders, the DHLs of the world, the UPS of the world, right? What people don't know about these companies is that they don't own trucks themselves. They tend to hire trucks that do delivery for
Very interesting.
Right? And these are every single 80% of the goods that move around Europe were generated by these companies, yet these companies had to hire small companies to do the deliveries for them. So in essence, 95% of the companies that did the deliveries were small. They owned 5 trucks on average. And then we started digging deeper into this segment, which is essentially the core of how goods move around Europe. And we found out that these guys that own companies, trucking companies in this case, they didn't have access to a banking infrastructure that catered to them. They didn't have access to payment systems that worked for them to help them refuel properly. They didn't have access to financing. So the big guys, the DHLs of the world, would pay them at 120 days. And they needed the money today, and they couldn't go to the bank and ask for money because they didn't have their finances in order. They were too small, too insignificant. And we understood these problems because at the end of the day, if these companies go bankrupt, the whole economy would
Right.
stop.
It's a
Right?
domino effect, right?
So 100%. So if trucking companies stop operating for 3 days, our supermarket shelves would run out of food, right? That's how important they are, and that's how forgotten
That's
they
incredible.
are at the same time, right? And I know it doesn't sound like a sexy market to get into, right? Trucking companies, but the most undigitized industries are the ones that are most ripe for digitization. And that's how the whole idea of OPTO came to be, because we started in the beginning saying, hey, we want to build something for small companies, but you can't boil the ocean, right? You can't just start solving all the problems for all companies. So we focused on logistics and trucking companies. And what we ended up building for them is a banking infrastructure that works for them, where they are able to, use our credit cards, where they're able to get access to financing within minutes without having to go and beg the DHLs of the world to pay them on time. And it worked quite well. So we launched in Europe. And then at a certain stage, we decided to take the product outside of Europe to the UAE. And this is what we're in the process of doing. We're in the process of adapting the product to this part of the world, mainly UAE, Saudi, potentially Egypt, and seeing what is needed to adapt the product. We will venture out of trucking companies, and we'll hopefully have a really cool story to sell here.
That is amazing. I mean, I applaud you, like, on one hand as woman to woman, on the other hand as human to human. I applaud the fact that you have done something that is so bold. I think the fact that you have really done something to help kind of the SMEs and the people that don't usually have a voice, and you've helped them in such a strategic way and something that is sustainable that they actually really need. And it's just, for me, it's so important for us to do that, to always help the little man, so to speak, the person that you don't necessarily know. Like, we know the DHLs and the kind of Amex, or not Amex, what was the other one that you mentioned? A DHL, the UPS.
The
Why am I thinking of
right.
Amex? UPS. So I love the fact that you did that. And obviously, as a female entrepreneur in an industry that is generally dominated by men, in more or less, what would you feel?
Aren't they all?
Preach, girl. But how would you describe, or what would you describe as your main challenge in this process?
When someone asked me the other day, because obviously I do fundraising, investor management, and I also deal with clients and so on. And someone asked me the other day, what was your biggest advantage in being a woman? And what's your biggest disadvantage in being a woman? And what I told them essentially was that my biggest disadvantage is that I get the attention before I start speaking, right? And my biggest advantage is that I get the attention before I start speaking. So it's a double-edged sword, right?
I like you.
And I think, and in essence, that's how every woman in business deals with it, right? We develop a thick skin, and we know how and when to use the tools available to us. And I think the biggest challenge is in itself not being taken seriously. I'm not going to obviously tell the stories of when I was in banking, I used to always be mistaken as the secretary and so on, because we've probably heard it many, many times before. But I would say the fact that I was a woman, especially I was an Arab woman, launching and raising money in Germany. We raised from VCs based in the United States and then VCs based in Europe. It was obviously I had to develop such a thick skin to be taken seriously. And I think a career in banking before provided me with that, because I had to deal with it right, left, and center, especially in the region here. You're from the region, you understand the dynamics, right? And I would say that's it. It's my biggest challenge has been my biggest advantage as well.
I love that. I love how you structured that answer as well. You turned something that was a challenge into almost an opportunity. And it's like, well, I am a woman. This is who I am. And I'm going to be proud of who I am and use it to my advantage and harness that resource and that thick skin, as you said, and be able to create something amazing out of it. And I love how inspiring that message in itself sounded. And you just said it yourself, like being across the banking industry, being across different countries through your experience, you must have had some unexpected situations or crazy, funny circumstances.
Yes, I did.
Tell me more.
I will choose one that's a bit idiotic because I really love it. So when I was in Kenya, have you been to that part of the world?
I have, yes.
Okay, so let me know what you think about some of the aspects I'm mentioning. There was a guy that had like a small fruit shop, and I used to always go to that guy to buy maracuya, passion fruit, and then take them back to my parents who loved it. My parents are in Lebanon, so we don't have a lot of passion fruit. So anyway, I'd always go buy 5 kgs, take them on a plane, fly them to Beirut. And then there was on my last trip, I think, to Kenya, I was doing exactly the same. I was like, hey, how's it going? Can I get 5 kgs? It was like, hey, sorry, today I have one left. I'm like, hey, the tree is behind you. Can you get me a few more? And he's like, no, that's for tomorrow. And then I'm like, dude, please, it's just, I promised my grandma, can you? And he's like, no. I'm like, I'll pay you double. He's like, no. I'll pay you triple. No, I'll pay you 5 times. Just go get me the fruit. No, that's for tomorrow. And then obviously my inner banker was very offended. So I was like,
Where is this going?
I wanted to explain to him the time value of money. That it's, if you get 5x today, the cost of a kilo, that's gonna make your life easier tomorrow, right? And obviously, I went on a 5-minute rant to explain to him the time value of money and why he should take my money now. And then I finished, and then with the most like hilarious, trusting face, he looks at me and he says, "You think you're wise, but you're otherwise." And then I went on and I started. It was like such a funny moment in my life because, first of all, it marked the end of an era, but it marked what I had learned from Kenyans and from particularly Kenyans, which was the bit of the slow living, right? A lot of us in the Western world and also in this part of the world, particularly the UAE, live super fast, are always future driven. We think about the future, we plan for the future the whole time. Very often we're not in the present, whereas, lots of people in East and West Africa live in the moment. It's like, yeah, tomorrow will bring what it brings, right? And this was a very pivotal moment for me because obviously it's hilarious, but it's also it reminded me of the value of slow living, and that kind of eventually triggered me to want to, move out of the banking industry. So I think it's a funny story because of that. And yeah, to be fair, I printed it on T-shirts and I printed it on cards and I started giving it to everybody, including my boss back then. Like, you think you're wise, but you're otherwise. Well, yeah. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that is a lesson to be learned, definitely. And the fact that he said it in such a he said something so impactful in few words as well. Like he didn't need more than, 5, 6 words to say that. So that is a very funny story. And I'm very sorry that I didn't
So
get your
funny, right?
I do apologize on behalf of the human race that you did not get your
Right?
passion.
Get a lesson for sure.
Yeah, you got a lifelong lesson. That's amazing. So speaking of lifelong lessons, I've had so much fun talking to you today. I've learned so much from you, and I'd love to know if you have any kind of final words of wisdom for listeners today.
So you mentioned earlier the female aspect of things. I've been talking to a lot of founders here in this part of the world who are women who want to raise money, right? And they don't know how to do it. They're not taken seriously, and they just don't know how to start. And I think one piece of advice that has worked very, very well for me is find your first follower, right? Fundraising and building something from scratch is a very long procedure. And if you find that one person, imagine it could be an angel investor, could be someone impactful in the community you want to build something in, right? It's a domino effect because that person will go out and will just essentially bring in the next investor or bring in the next person you need, right? So focusing on finding that first follower is super essential if you want to become an entrepreneur or build anything. And I assume, obviously, since you have if you have your entrepreneurial journey as well with the startup, you might have something to say about this. You know, that one that triggers the whole flood. But yeah, that would be my advice.
No, I appreciate that. I think it is important to when you have somebody who is willing to take that leap with you, take that first step, that is what will build the foundation for your, that's the domino effect in itself, right? When one person invests in you and has that faith in you, others will then, slowly follow once they see the value that comes out of investing in you. So I couldn't agree more. I think that's a very valid piece of advice of finding your follower. And I really appreciate that you shared something so what would seem so basic and so simple that actually has a massive, profound impact on your business and is so difficult to do. So thank you so much for sharing your story with me today, Lama. And I know for a fact that all my followers will be inspired by your story.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks, guys. Take care. Bye.